Representative Romero he's not on our standing subcommittee, but he is an invited guest. He had requested that, and any member that wants to sit on the dais and ask questions, my policy is that they're welcome to do so. Welcome, and be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Chairman Spiller. I really appreciate
Sure.
that. Thank you for opening with that. I do have a couple of questions. I think Representative Zwiener did a really great job of trying to get to some of the questions that I wanted to ask you. You know my county well. You probably know my sheriff.
Love your county,
Wayborn.
yes. And they are participating, yes.
And they are participating in 287G. The first time I ever met with Sheriff Wayborn, I met him before he got elected, then I met him once he was elected, and it was specifically to go in and talk to him about what his intent was with 287G, and just to determine what his goals were. And so, this is something that's not new to me, but I do want to talk to you about some of the things that have occurred since then, and then hope that you have some plan to deal with that, because it seems like some of the questions that were asked still were undetermined. We don't know where the cost is going to come from, or maybe as to one of the last questions Representative Zwiener asked, like what does an ICE hold really constitute? What is the list of all of those, and how many of those are not those persons that were described that you and I both know we don't want on our streets?
Right.
If you're selling fentanyl, we don't want you in Texas. We believe that there's a cost to pay for people that are going to hurt others. But on that vein, do you believe that 287G has made, since you're from Jack County and you know Tarrant County well, do you believe that 287G has made Tarrant County safer?
I don't know that. I think certainly it could have. I can't speak to that because I don't have personal knowledge of it. But I know if you have people that, and this assumes that they weren't otherwise in Tarrant County identifying these people anyway when on a bookend process, but let's assume that they were not. If they were not, and they now are, and those folks that have detainers are being identified and picked up by ICE within 48 hours, we know that otherwise, if they weren't identified as such, they would be subject to being bonded out and would be back on the streets. So I don't know the actual numbers, and I don't know that that's actually happening, so that it requires some assumptions on my part. But certainly, if they weren't otherwise identifying them, and they are now, and Tarrant County participates in the jail enforcement model, which would identify those people and have them transport those folks or cooperate in that with ICE, then we know that at least the people that are being handled would not otherwise be out on the street. So if those assumptions are true, then I would say yes, but that's also based on historical data, knowing that how many people bond out on certain crimes and reoffend while they're on bond, and that's I don't have that data in front of me, but we know that happens.
But you wouldn't believe that Tarrant County, being a tough on crime county, is going to let someone bond out for murder, sexual assault within 48 hours, do you?
Well, it depends. If
I guess my question
they
is,
could be, if they're not identified, if the bond is set on any bond, we're not talking about aliens or anything, we're not talking about people with detainers, but if someone is charged, it could be an instance where bond is denied for a particular charge, but bonds are sometimes set at a very high amount, and those people can bond out very quickly.
Let me rephrase it. So if someone is, as you mentioned in your own words, most counties are doing this anyway. They know how.
Well, I don't know. They should be. I can't say that they are. I don't have the data for that.
Well, in that most, let's say it's Tarrant County, and the DA well there. You know our system. You don't believe that in Tarrant County, if someone murders someone, goes through that process even before they had 287G. I don't think that there's a county in the state that if someone is murdered, they're not checking their immigration status.
I don't
unless
know
you believe.
that.
Okay,
but I don't know that. But I certainly, if someone is charged with murder, they're going to take a long, hard look before they set the bond, and they're going to be very careful about the amount of the bond that they're going to set, if they do set one.
So if you don't know that, have you heard of cases anywhere else in our state where rapists, murderers have bonded out within 48 hours prior to an ICE hold, where someone has said it just happened in X county?
The governor at his State of the State address at the beginning of this session laid out instances, or at least one particular instance, where that did in fact happen. And I have, because I was working on bail reform, have visited with Senator Huffman. She's very concerned about that, and that it's happened primarily in Harris County, that some of those things unfortunately actually have occurred, and that is very concerning to me.
The situation that the governor talked about in the State of the State, was that in the state of Texas?
Yes,
The case that he described?
I believe so.
I think we should check into that.
Okay.
The other question, and one of the points that was brought up was about the amount of jailers and the deficit of jailers that we have, because this bill does not support large counties. I'm assuming that's because there's an understanding that these counties already have the resources that are available.
Presumably, yes.
Okay, so in Tarrant County, last year we closed down our jail. I'm sorry, in 2023, we had over 4,800 people in jail. We were at capacity, and we had to close our jail. And the reason for that was because just in March, we had over 200 open detention officer positions. So here, we don't have a small county, we have a large county, and we don't have the jailers, and we're at capacity, but yet your bill doesn't support those. So to Representative Lowe's point, you could argue that this bill is adding to the taxpayers' cost every single person in Tarrant County, no question. And I'll be specific. So many of the things that you said are going to be the responsibilities, like to serve and execute a warrant, takes time. You mentioned that it takes 30 minutes to an hour to book someone in at most jails. Well, in Tarrant County, it'll probably take you 18 to 24 hours. I mean, if you've ever had a friend that's ended up in jail, just try to find them in the system. It takes a long time in Tarrant County. So those things all require cost. Transport, if you do the task force model, or I'm sorry, even just the jail enforcement model, those things all have cost. We're out of space. We don't have jailers. There's time. How have those sheriffs responded to you, and why there wasn't support for those counties so it doesn't fall back on the taxpayers of Tarrant County?
Okay.
Because we're talking about Tarrant County, right?
Yeah, it's kind of, your question's got several different parts to it. Let me say this. When you go back to, you were at capacity, I assume capacity doesn't mean bed capacity, it means staffed bed capacity. Different deal. But nonetheless, I don't know that it would take 24 hours to book someone in other than just hold them. I'm talking about when they receive someone in a jail and they go through diagnostics where they get all their identifying information, they fingerprint them, they do all the things that you would do, ask everything, all their medical history, all the stuff that, there's a lot of things that we don't think about, but there are things like that jailers do when they book someone in, and where they have all that identifying information, some of it just for the inmates' benefit and what they need to have. And then they have property with them, they have clothes, they have belongings, they have other things. Yes, it takes a while to go through that. I don't know that it should take 24 hours unless someone is just waiting to go through that process. But the actual process, when they start that process till they finished, shouldn't take more, in my view, more than 30 minutes or an hour to go through that. But let's say it's an hour. All they have to do is check the federal database and see if there's an ICE detainer on this individual. If it is, then under just the warrant service model, not the one that Tarrant County is doing, which is the jail enforcement model, that's at a higher level. But under the warrant service model, all they have to do is identify those folks, serve that warrant on them, tell them, once they identify them, it's been served, notify ICE, and tell ICE you got 48 hours to get them. I'm having a hard time understanding why that's going to add countless individuals and that we need to add to the payroll of Tarrant County. I just don't see that. And maybe it is, and maybe I just don't understand it, but to me, that seems fairly simple.
Let me give you a couple of other
Sure.
things that are of concern, and this is coming from a Tarrant County resident. Sheriff Wayborn brought in 287G from the time he came in. And to transport someone takes time and resources. That takes someone that could have otherwise been in the jail. They're no longer there. So that's one of the reasons why it takes so long.
I would agree with that. And let me say this. Under that jail enforcement model that Tarrant County is under, yes, it would, if they choose to participate in that, it would require or could require them to transport that person to us to as far as that detainer goes. But again, they chose to operate at that level as opposed to the warrant service model, warrant service officer model, which does not require them to transport.
So should a county in your bill only be moving into jail enforcement or task force if they have the resources to, but your bill isn't offering? I think that your bill doesn't say it. Actually says the opposite. It says you're not going to get it. But I'll move on just because I think that for the sake of time, I don't want to take up too much. Have you ever heard the name Anthony Johnson?
No.
Well, Anthony Johnson was a U.S. veteran that was in Tarrant County Jail, and he died in his first day in Tarrant County Jail. And since Sheriff Wayborn has been our sheriff, over 65 people have died in our jail, some of which Representative Lowe and I have talked about. That is of huge concern for people in Tarrant County, that our focus and our priorities are not on the people, and a lot of those people, and I would say Anthony Johnson, being a former veteran, could be seen as a hero and maybe had a tough time in his life, and that he lost his life, and people in Tarrant County would argue, because the resources aren't being spent where they should be. And an understaffed jail. Now, realizing that, this bill could cost lives. This bill could cost lives because we're not focusing on. So, like, how and where is how? Yeah,
let me say this, and I didn't realize till after it happened on the previous bill, or a previous bill, when I laid out and some of you may not have been here, but I explained that we're not gonna have verbal outbursts, and we're also not going to do other things that noise making to comment one way or the other. So I've been fair. I want to be fair, but the clicking or the snapping or the other stuff, whether it's that applause or people standing up and talking, we're not going to do that here, okay? And I'm being fair about that. But anyway, it interrupts our conversation. So please feel free. Go ahead.
I just want to put a name to your bill, because I don't have all 65 persons' names, but I could, and I had the staff, like, let's talk about different ones and get into details. But I would ask you to really understand that this really is real people's lives when we're talking about these burdens that are being placed on our counties, especially the larger counties. And I'll give you another name. When I asked the question about does it make Tarrant County safe, one of the things that wasn't talked about yet is what it does to communities, and I'm sure a lot of these people that are here are probably going to talk about what happens to communities and communities like mine and the constituents that I represent. Have you ever heard the name Garrett Hull?
No.
Okay. Garrett Hull was a Fort Worth police officer, and I said was, because after we passed SB4, all the concerns of making immigrant communities less safe, I warned, this is the beginning of how those things happen. I grew up in a time in the 70s where these kinds of, you'd be deported. So there was less people reporting crimes, calling in, becoming a part of law enforcement by being a witness to crimes. 17 times the bar in my district got robbed before Fort Worth PD finally did a sting. And when they did, one of the perpetrators put a bullet in the body of Garrett Hull, and we lost his life. So it made Garrett Hull less safe in fighting crime that occurs in immigrant communities. If bills like this make a community less safe, how do we respond to the families of law enforcement officers out there in a community that doesn't call law enforcement anymore?
Well, and it's a terrible thing to have loss of life from a veteran, from a police officer, or from anyone in a jail, regardless of the circumstances. I certainly hate to hear of anyone losing their lives in a jail. But I would say
This was
that
on his beat.
right.
as
But
an
I would
investigator.
say that this bill doesn't require anyone to go out into the street or do anything like that. If a sheriff, the sheriff can, if their department, through his leadership, and they want to enforce this, and if they want to determine people's immigration status when they stop and detain people for other charges, they have the absolute right to do that under Texas law now and under federal law. But what you're describing is something that happens outside the confines of a jail facility. There should not be loss of life by anyone, whether it be a defendant, someone that is detained or whatever, or anyone else in that safe jail facility by virtue of this bill. And if someone chooses to participate in this 287G program, either at the first level or the second level, I don't see how that occurs because all of that is happening within the confines of the jail. If they take it to that task force model where it goes out in the street and they have officers that are trained to interrogate and follow up with that, that's a different thing. But this bill does not require that to happen. This bill is not making people unsafe. This bill is not. It's not intended to have that effect, and I can't see any scenario where it would cause that. If a sheriff or a law enforcement department chooses to engage and do those things, which they may have every right to do, and unfortunately some things happen, they can do that, but it's not going to be by virtue of this bill.
But it's possible that they could. If you're not living in an incorporated city, then those sheriff's officers, that's who your law enforcement is. In an
I don't
unincorporated
believe it's possible that this bill causes those things to happen. They can do that. It's possible that they can get into a skirmish or get into a situation where out in the streets where there's loss of life, but 100% it's not going to be caused by this bill. If they choose to participate and they choose to do those things, they can, but that's not. I respectfully disagree that this bill is going to cause it, because this bill doesn't cause it. It doesn't require them to participate and do anything outside the confines of the jail.
This will be my last request.
Sure.
When you speak to law enforcement and their experience, and I would hope that there would be more law enforcement here that actually talk about what happens in those communities when laws that do allow for more ICE enforcement, presence enforcement, whether or not that makes those communities less safe. And I would testify to you that the reason why we don't have Garrett Hull with us still is because he didn't choose what kind of crime he was going to fight. He fought all kinds of crime. And in this case, it was an increase in crime against the undocumented community because they just stopped calling the law 17 times in a row. That same place got robbed before they finally did something. Not until those folks got put on the ground, and that was the fact. So I think that when these people testify, I hope that you would have that name in mind, that it wasn't about that undocumented person that some people may want to see like a criminal, but it was about Garrett Hull, a Fort Worth police officer, who went out there to try to keep that from happening, and he ended up losing his own life.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for bringing that to my attention.
Thank
I
you
will
for
say
allowing me
this,
to be
the concerns that you've raised, that Representative Weiner has raised, those are things that I will look into, and I'm certainly willing to have a discussion if we're going to have a bill, my position always is to have the best bill that I can, and I'm certainly open to working on that, to have some of those safeguards and some of those issues that have been brought up addressed.
I look forward to the
Thank you.
conversation.
You bet.